Good morning. I'm Harry Rock, and welcome to another edition of the Westfield Council on Aging Presents. This is a special collaborative program between Tina Gorman, Executive Director of the Westfield Council on Aging, and Pete Coles, producer of WCPC Westfield Cable Channel 15. Our topic today is fire safety for seniors, and we have a checklist that we're going to be going through. I am very excited to have Ben Warren, who is the Deputy Fire Chief and Fire Prevention Officer, as our guest from the Westfield Fire Department. And Ben, welcome to the show. Glad to have you. This is we did this 2 years ago, and nice to have you in person this time. We did it via Zoom last time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, well, no, we're thrilled. I think it's apropos that we should be talking about it. Even though winter's starting to close out, I'm guessing that the winter is is that a higher incident level for fires and issues with the fire department?
Definitely. During the wintertime, we see a marked increase in fires, and a lot of that is due to heating equipment and people being indoors all the time, and use of different types of space heaters and things like that. It is just this year alone, we've experienced 4 large-scale fires within the last 2 months, I think.
Wow.
So it's been an exceptionally busy time of the year for us.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, winter's not over yet, and I think it's apropos that we should continue to talk about fire safety. Regardless of the time of year, fires can happen. It doesn't matter whether it's in the middle of the summer or fall or April. You've just got to be really vigilant about protecting yourself. So why don't we just jump right into it? House numbers. How important are house numbers, and is that an issue for you?
Yeah, it's very important to have accurate house numbers on your house that are large enough and kind of contrast the background so that they can be easily found from people out on the street. When our responders are going to somebody's house, they're out in the middle of the road trying to figure out which house is which. Some of places in town where we have very dense housing, you have a lot of houses right next to each other. It can be kind of hard to figure out which number goes with which building. Especially this also is an issue out on the outskirts of towns too, where we have sometimes longer driveways and the numbers aren't necessarily consecutive. So it greatly speeds up our response time and accuracy if you have good house numbers that are visible from a long distance. Now, that being said, we do have GPS technology in all the ambulances and the engines that we can use to actually pinpoint the houses, but it's still, it's necessary to have, those numbers on the houses because the responders coming to your house may not necessarily be from the city of Westfield. We could be busy on other calls. We could have other towns coming in to backfill and provide mutual aid, and they wouldn't have the same resources that we would have as far as the GIS systems for finding houses. So we can't stress house numbers enough. We can't fix what we can't find. It's that simple.
That's a great statement. We can't fix what we can't find. To your point, I live on North Road up on the north side, and it's funny because the numbers jump. You'd think that they would go, so we're 243. You think it would be like 245 would be the next one, and I forget my next door neighbor jumps. There's this gap in the numbers. Plus, he has a long driveway. You can't even see his house from the street, and sometimes people get confused as to, is his driveway mine? Is my driveway his?
Yep.
And you can't see the house. So
exactly. In some of these older neighborhoods, the numbers when the houses were built long time ago, they don't even make sense. Like Hamden Ave, places like that. There's, of course, Hamden Street, which is downtown, but there's also a Hamden Ave, which is up off of Docks Road.
Oh, sure.
And the numbers start in the 200s up there.
Right.
That's where the numbers begin. So some of these roads, they just, historically, they don't make sense.
So I have a question for you. Because I live on the north side, on North Road, Montgomery shares the same, I've always wondered about this, they share the same zip code as we do. Mm-hmm. There's a North Road in Montgomery, just as you start going up the hill where the Montgomery Grill is, where the old nursing home is. And I've always wondered, I said, certainly with the post office, I said, I don't know how they don't get the mail confused, but would that ever come up where you're working in the same zip code, but there's 2 North Roads, and one's in Montgomery and one's in Westfield, or does a GPS really
The GPS
center
makes a
in.
big difference on that. And the other thing that helps out with that is the technology that's used by our city's communications department, where when 911 calls come in, they actually, the location of the call, they've got a map in the dispatch center up there, and it actually pinpoints exactly where the caller is coming from
Oh, okay.
with a fairly reasonable degree of accuracy. So that helps out a lot with that.
Right.
But there have been issues I can think of over the course of my career where we've gotten calls where someone will call for an emergency on Wilson Ave, but the avenue part gets cut off for some reason. So we'd actually have to go out and check Wilson Street and Wilson Avenue because we've got both in this city. So that has been an issue kind of before. I think technology is improving that, fortunately, but it's still something we have to be very careful of.
But to your point, I know that there are streets in Westfield where the main name of the street, there's two streets with that same name. One's a street, one's a road, and so, or an avenue.
Last time I checked, I think it's 7 streets that start with Oak.
Oh,
Between
really?
Oakwood, Oak Crest, Oak Lane, Oak Ave, Oak Street.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it's tough. There's
Right.
we have Bates Street, Bates Road. These are big mistakes if you can't get that address right. So a lot of times what we do is we've got the technology, but we also use the old-fashioned maps on the walls at the fire station. I mean, every firefighter is supposed to know their streets and be very familiar with it, but still check.
Right.
Still check.
But
Because
I think that that's an important message that we should be sending to our audience is make sure that when you are calling in that you are using a full name. Don't assume that just because you say Ashley, that people know where that is. It could be Ashley Street, could be Ashley Avenue.
Yep.
So make sure that you're really explicit on that. The other thing that, growing up, I always remember mailboxes always having the name of the person on there, the Rocks or Harry and Ann Rock on the mailbox. In today's world, people don't put their names on the boxes anymore. Is that a factor for you at all, or does that not play in? Is
particularly.
it just
No,
the
it's
number?
more numbers. It's
the
more
number.
numbers is what matters for us. Is we have to be able to see the numbers, and the numbers have to correspond with the house. That's why we want to see the numbers on the house if the house is visible from the street. If it's not, then we need to have it on the mailbox or a small sign or something that marks the driveway. Because going by names, it's
Right.
names. Sometimes they change when the house has changed,
Right.
and sometimes they don't. It's so that can create some confusion too.
Is there a required size of number that you're supposed to put on your mailbox on your house, or is it just recommended? Is it?
It's a recommended size of the numbers, I believe. I'd have to look to see what it is. It's
Probably 2 or 3
2 or
inches.
3 inches, yeah.
Right.
And the other thing is we need numbers that contrast with the background, because there's a lot of houses in town, and I've run across this where they have very fancy, decorative, gold numbers that attach to the outside of the house, but due to the fact that the house has a brown background to it at nighttime, without shining a spotlight on it, it's very hard to detect the numbers. So we need something that really stands out. Unfortunately, that might not be the best for decorative purposes, but that's really what we need to be able to find the right addresses.
Yeah, but both for fire and for ambulance services, so people should be thinking about that. That's a great point.
Correct.
Let's talk about certainly one of the things that people sometimes get a little lax on, but smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors in the home. Clearly, first line of defense for saving yourself and your loved ones and pets if there is something that's going on in your home. What do people need to be thinking about when it comes to detectors?
So what they need to do is make sure that their detectors are new. A lot of times what can happen with houses is people will, they're required to have, when you sell a house, you're required to have an inspection, and you're required to have current smoke detectors that meet the current version of the fire code. Once people have been in their houses for a while, though, they kind of lose track of it. So it's really important that you change the batteries in the smoke detectors every 6 months to make sure that they're fresh. And the elements inside smoke detectors that actually activate and detect the actual smoke, those can degrade over time. And so the life cycle of a smoke detector is 10 years. After 10 years, the detector is no good anymore, and it's got to be replaced.
Is that right?
Yep. And the reason being is that they can't guarantee that after 10 years, that detector is going to be as accurate as it was the day it came off the assembly line.
Okay.
Now, one thing that is happening with the technology that's actually making things a little bit easier about that is they now make smoke detectors, and these are what's required by code, that have a 10-year sealed battery in them. So the idea is that you can't replace the batteries. You can't take them out and put them in a remote control.
Huh.
We've seen that. And you don't have to worry about remembering to replace the batteries. You put the smoke detector up. Once you twist the smoke detector into its base, it activates, and it will stay active for, they advertise, for the next 10 years. At the end of the detector's life cycle, it will start giving a chirp, and it will chirp once a minute, every minute, and that's what signifies that the detector either has an internal problem or the battery is wearing out on it, and the whole detector is disposable and it just needs to be replaced. So that helps, but you really got to stay current with these and just not, because they're easy to forget when they're up on the ceiling and you don't have a fire and you don't need them.
You know, to your point, we moved into our house about 30 years ago, brand new house. I still think of it as new, but I'm realizing 30 years isn't new anymore.
That's right.
And I'm guessing I am sure we haven't changed our smoke detectors out. And matter of fact, I was just looking at it when I was prepping for this yesterday. I was looking up at the smoke detector where I was sitting, and I said, "Oh, that's really kind of turned yellow. It should be white." It's
You definitely
plastic ages out.
Most smoke detectors, the really old ones don't, but all the new smoke detectors, at least the ones in the last 20 years, they all have the date of manufacture printed on the back of them. So if you take the smoke detector down, you can see when it was manufactured, and then you know if you're in the 10-year window of life or not. Carbon monoxide detectors, generally, those are only good for 7 years.
Oh,
so they
really?
even have a shorter life
Wow.
cycle on those. If they are in a combination detector, you can get a full 10 years out of them. But if they're the separate ones that you mount, like, say, on the baseboard of a hallway or something, those have to be changed out every 7 years, too. And that's just to guarantee that they're going to be as accurate as they were when they were first manufactured.
Okay.
So that's really key to having that done. And there are resources out there for people through the senior center and through the fire department where we can, find replacement smoke detectors for people to try to help them out with that.
So here's a question for you, and we're going to talk about hardwired versus non-hardwired in a second, but mine are hardwired. So if it has that little 3-degree turn, and then the thing pops down, and then I have to pull the clips out to detach it. Is that a universal replacement part, the actual detector that I can buy to replace that?
Well, you can buy new detectors to replace that, yes. The catch is that when you do that, you really need to buy all the detectors in your house at the same time and get the same brand. Because what happens is when the detectors are put in and they're interconnected by a wire, they need to be the same brand so that they can communicate with each other. They are certain brands that can overlap, but certain ones can't. So you're better, to be safe, you have to have all the same brand detectors, and you're better off just buying them all at the same time every 10 years and getting them and having them installed by an electrician. Now, the reason why is the plugs that go in the back of them, each brand has a different plug. And so one brand can't plug into like a universal plug.
That's what I was wondering about.
So that's why you have an electrician do it. They can actually, it's only a couple of wire nuts, 3 wires that go into each detector, and they can change it out. When you buy the new detectors, they come from the factory in the package. They've got the actual pigtail that goes on it with the correct plug.
Okay.
So you have an electrician change those.
So I need to change the base as well. You can't just change the unit that goes into the base and snaps.
Yeah,
in.
the plate that goes that
Right.
mounts and actually screws into the electrical box, that part will come with the detector too.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, that's interesting. And so, to your point, I've got my to-do list here. I got to I got to find an electrician now. So does the electrician buy the units and bring them with him, or do I buy them and then just get him to come and
Most
install
electricians have access to them, and they'll buy them through an electrical warehouse. I
Okay.
can't guarantee like how every electrician's going to do it. It's whatever you
But,
contract with
but
them
you
to
should,
do. And,
if you're talking
just
to
have
an
a
electrician,
conversation
just
with them.
ask them that question, whether you need to provide them or whether
or
you
whether
can provide them.
they will provide them.
Okay, that's a great point. And so the other thing I just learned is that you said that the units talk to one another. So does that mean if one detects smoke in one part of the house, the rest of them will start?
They will all sound. Yep, that's the idea behind it. And so, depending on what year the house was built, because there's been different requirements over the course of the years. Interestingly, the state of Massachusetts did not have a building code until 1975. And
Oh, wow.
once they enacted that building code in 1975, that's when they started requiring all new construction to have hardwired interconnected smoke detectors in them. Now, the nice thing about those is that you have to have one by code on every level of the house. But what happens is if you have a fire that starts in a burner or boiler downstairs or a wood stove in your basement and you're asleep on the second floor, that smoke detector, you're probably not going to hear the one that's sounding in the basement, but you will hear the one that's sounding on the second floor. And so the ones that are like in bedrooms or in hallways outside of bedrooms, those sometimes just act as speakers. And it's just another way to make more noise to wake you up. And that's what the value of having interconnected smoke detectors is.
I didn't realize that they all talk to one another, though.
Yep.
That's really, really interesting. And so, if like our house was built in 1990, so it would be using modern codes at that point. So I'm
Yep.
guessing that I have to look. I don't know if every room has one, or they're just in each hallway, or I'd have to look
I
at.
believe for that age range, and don't quote me on this because normally I have a cheat sheet because it
Okay,
gets
yeah,
pretty
sure.
complex as far as remembering the years and stuff like that. But up until 1997 is when they started requiring smoke detectors in all bedrooms too.
Okay.
Now, generally, fires don't generally seem to start in bedrooms, but the advantage of having a smoke detector in the bedroom that's hardwired and interconnected with the rest of the system is, again, if you have a large house and you're on the second floor and there's a problem in your basement, you're going to have a speaker. The smoke detector is going to sound right in your room and alert you.
Okay.
So that's what inherently makes them so safe, and
Okay.
the advantages to having
Okay.
hardwired smoke detectors.
And is it safe to say, or maybe not, that the most common, where is the most common source of fires? Is it kitchen?
Usually
is it the furnace
kitchens
area?
and heating equipment in
Okay.
basements is
Okay.
generally where we see. I mean, they can happen anywhere in a house.
Right.
It could just be an overloaded electrical outlet or something along those lines. Something we can talk about as we get further into this as far as plugging in heating equipment and stuff like that during the wintertime. But generally, it's heating equipment and cooking seem to be some of your greatest causes of fires, along with things like smoking and improper disposal of smoking materials and things like that. But those are definitely the big ones. So it's always good to make sure your smoke detectors are up to date
Yeah.
and make sure they're new enough to work when you need them.
So every 10 years, people, let's get those replaced out, and every 6 months, get those batteries.
Yep, and even the hardwired smoke detectors, they do have 9-volt batteries in them to act as a battery backup in case you lose power. So they still will function. Those batteries, even though you have hardwired smoke detectors, those batteries still need to be changed every 6 months.
Right. Right.
Now, those hardwired smoke detectors, if you lose power for a large duration of time, you can't necessarily rely on the batteries. I'm talking like the power's out for a full week, which hasn't happened in a long time, but it has. Those 9-volt batteries are trying to power a smoke detector that is designed to run on 120-volt wall current.
Oh, wow.
So they're not going to last as long as they say a regular battery-operated smoke detector.
Okay.
So we have a lot of older housing stock in our city, like a lot of cities in the Northeast. The requirements for smoke detectors in houses that were built before the building code require those 10-year sealed battery smoke detectors I was talking to you about before. It's still important to keep those batteries up in those older houses if you don't have hardwired smoke detectors.
So in that case, if you do have an older home, to your point, there's a lot of farmhouses and stuff, especially up where I live in the Wyben area. Older homes, very quaint, but old, you know.
Yep.
So they probably aren't using wired smoke detectors. So they're using just battery operated ones.
Yep.
And they're mounting them wherever they choose to.
Yep. And they should be at one on each level of the house, one outside each common sleeping area. So what they mean by that is most bedrooms in houses, they have hallways, and the bedrooms are off the hallways.
Okay.
So you want one in the bedroom, or in the hallway, excuse me, that's centrally located to all the bedrooms there. And you want one at the base of each staircase leading to the floor above. And now the reason they want them there is
At
because
the base of each
staircase
staircase.
leading to the floor above. So the idea is that if you do have a fire down on the first floor, you want that smoke detector to sound hopefully before the staircase that you need to exit with is filled with smoke. That's why you want one to protect each staircase. And you also need one in the basement too. And again, at the bottom of the staircase in the basement.
So in the case of a staircase, where are you mounting it? On the wall next to it, or?
Well, what you generally want to do is you want to see them mounted on the horizontal level part that's not in the staircase. The wording that the code uses is at the base of, but not within the staircase. So you want it on the flat part, just at the bottom of the stairs.
Okay, on the floor itself then, right?
Not on the floor, but like on the ceiling.
Oh, on the
On
ceiling.
the ceiling, the horizontal part of the ceiling, not the slope part of the staircase that's going up. You know how when you go up the
Yes, right,
staircase,
right.
you see the drywall.
I've got you, right.
Yeah, you want it on the part that's
Oh, I've got you.
parallel
Okay.
to the
Okay,
ground.
so it's still the ceiling,
It's
but
still
at
on
the
the
bottom
ceiling.
of the staircase.
Yes.
On the flat part, right?
So it'd be
before it
just
starts.
outside of the staircase.
Got it.
Yep, that's where you
Okay.
want to see them.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, that makes a lot of sense. So how much of an issue is clutter when you have to enter a house?
That can be a very big issue. Unfortunately, we understand that there are people that want to keep a lot of things, but we got to have safe access into houses. And there are resources out there for people who may be having trouble with this. But the fire department needs access to a number of different places in your home in the case of an emergency. One is we got to be able to get our equipment into your house in a medical emergency to treat somebody who's having a medical problem. We bring a lot of stuff in with us. First aid bags, drug kits, cardiac monitors, so we can start the treatment at the patient's side. We also have to be able to remove people out of houses too, which means we need open staircases. If we're going to be carrying people in a stair chair down a staircase, we really need that staircase clear for the protection of the firefighters and the resident themselves. The other thing we need access to is things like circuit panels in basements and things like that. We got to have clear access to that in case we need to come in and turn off an outlet or something back at the circuit panel. So keeping your house free of clutter is very, very important as far as fire safety goes. The other thing is clutter can just add to the fire loading in the building, and it can take what would be a small fire and really amplify it rapidly and turn it into something much bigger than it needs to be. So, and it's, like I said, it's a tough issue to deal with that. And we understand that there are certain people out there that might need some help or some assistance in dealing with some of that clutter, but that can make a big difference.
And you do run into that.
Yeah, unfortunately we do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep, and we've seen houses where some places it gets to kind of a bad situation where we've had houses where we haven't been able to find people in buildings because there's just so much stuff.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Yeah, that's tough. That's
It
tough.
is. It is.
Yeah. Let's talk about the kitchen and the oven. I can remember a sister of mine who lived in New York City who had no storage area at all and didn't cook, so they would always order out for herself and her daughter, we always laughed about it, but when you opened the oven, that was the bookcase. Everything that was paper driven that was where she stored stuff, and I'm thinking, oh my God, probably the worst thing you could ever have.
We can't stress enough that is not a great place to store anything, because people can inadvertently reach across a counter and accidentally hit a knob and turn something on without
sure.
realizing it. Same thing with your cooktop too, your actual burners on your stove. Don't ever store anything close to those, because it is possible for those knobs to get turned accidentally without trying to. And we have seen that happen where things have gotten lit on fire and had a kitchen fire because of that. I remember it did happen a few years ago just downtown, and that's exactly what happened. Somebody accidentally was reaching for something that was on the counter and turned a knob on an oven just enough to cause it to ignite, and it was a gas stove, and it ignited what was being stored inside the oven. So that's really important. It's also important to keep your oven clean. A lot of people have self-cleaning ovens. Make sure you run those self-cleaning ovens on a regular basis, and that way you don't get a large buildup of grease inside an oven, because that can certainly start a fire if you get too much grease in there on the walls and on the top part of the oven. So that's where cleanliness really, really matters, because it can start a kitchen fire accidentally.
And you see that. Yeah.
Yep,
That's
that
interesting.
happens. People, we see a lot of ovens that haven't been cleaned nearly often enough, and you'll have an actual fire in the oven. So fortunately, a lot of times those fires are contained to the oven, but it can put a lot of smoke out into the housing unit, and really it can wreck a lot of belongings and clothing and stuff like that. That even though it was a small fire that was contained, you're still going to have that smell in your house. That's going to be very hard to get rid of.
That's a great point. So, thinking about that for a second, if someone does encounter a fire, a stove or an oven fire, is that something that they can handle themselves? Should they immediately call? What's the protocol on that?
Definitely
Because
call the
people
fire
are thinking,
department.
okay, I got to try to put this fire out.
Yep, definitely call the fire department first and foremost. If you have an extinguisher that's available to you after you call the fire department, you can go ahead and try to use it. But we always tell people to keep your fire extinguishers close to a door. What we don't want to have people do is become trapped because they tried fighting the fire by themselves, right? So you put the fire extinguisher next to the door. Call 911, get to the door. That way you're right there at the edge of the building. You're almost outside. If you think it's safe and if you have a fire extinguisher and you think you can put it out, go ahead and try, but always go from the door towards the fire so that you don't have the fire between you and your exit.
Great point. Great point.
Like I said, you need a fire extinguisher near the door. Doors don't just light on fire. That's not where your fire is going to be. That's where you want to be before you even consider using a fire extinguisher.
Great point. Great point.
Is have an escape route.
How many fire extinguishers do you recommend in a house?
I have a couple in my house, one in the basement, one upstairs near the door. But there's no codes or there's nothing that really recommends where they have to be until you
Okay.
start getting into commercial buildings or multifamily occupancies.
Okay.
So it's a good idea to have them. I would say one or two. But like I said, most importantly is the location.
And fire extinguishers, where can you purchase those? Is that like Rockies or
Yep,
Home
they
Depot?
can be found
or-
at both those places.
Okay.
Yeah, any type of general department store, hardware store, or home center like that would have them.
Okay. And the same thing for smoke detectors and carbon monoxide
Correct.
detectors. You can find those at those same kind
Yep.
of locations.
Exactly.
Okay.
We would caution, especially with the smoke detectors, a lot of when we do real estate transactions, that's one of the things when you sell a home, the seller of the home has to have a certificate from the fire department that says that the house meets the codes for smoke detectors. So a lot of people will purchase their smoke detectors through online services such as Amazon and other places like that. We would just caution you that a lot of times what happens is there's a lot of smoke detectors out there that don't meet the codes as required here in Massachusetts. And it's real easy to get battery-operated smoke detectors that say don't have a 10-year sealed battery, and that will cause you to fail the inspection. But that's what was available and what was cheap on Amazon, and people didn't realize it. So it's tough when you buy smoke detectors online to get the right
Be
ones.
careful, know what
Yep.
you're getting.
Know what you're
That's
getting.
a great point. And even if, my recommendation would be if you think you found something, can they call you at the firehouse to just say, hey,
Oh, definitely.
this is what I'm ordering, this is the code, or this is the type,
Yep.
is this?
Yep.
Okay.
And the other thing we do is we're trying to make a lot of our interactions with our customers a lot easier on the fire department as far as this stuff goes. So our office staff has been doing a great job of printing up the regulations and trying to put them together in a nice, easy-to-follow format so that everyone has access to that information right there at their fingertips.
Okay, that's
So,
great.
Don't hesitate. City's website, cityofwestfield.org. And if you go to the fire department page, they've got all that information in a very, very easy-to-use fashion.
Oh, that's great to know. Okay. Let's talk about electrical outlets. I am guessing, especially around Christmas,
Yep.
that electrical outlets get overloaded, or certainly when people are using space heaters and stuff. And then you've got extension cords, and extension cords are weighted, meaning light duty versus medium duty versus heavy duty. So you need to know what type of extension cord you're using. 3-prong versus 2-prong. Let's just talk about the whole issue of outlets.
So generally speaking, extension cords are not something you want to use on a permanent basis. Extension cords are designed with, you're going to plug something in that's not near an outlet, but you're only going to use it temporarily. Like a drill, or somebody who's doing home improvement, they would have a battery, instead of a battery-operated drill, they'd have one that plugs into the wall. That's a great place for an extension cord to be used. You don't ever want to be using extension cords regularly on a repetitive basis because you don't have enough outlets in your walls, because they do have problems. The more an extension cord is bent and twisted, there's a good chance of the conductors inside of it becoming frayed, and that can create a lot of resistance, which results in a lot of heating. And there are a lot of cases where extension cords start fires because there's been either internal damage to it or people are using too light of an extension cord for the appliance that they're trying to use, and it overloads the extension cord or the outlet. Anytime you don't ever want to run any type of cord underneath a carpet either, because what happens there is you don't see it. You don't realize that there's continuous motion on the carpet over the top of the extension cord, kind of abrading it and fraying it. And the carpet holds in heat. So if the extension cord has too much heat going through it, too much electricity going through it, and the carpet above it is insulating it, that's a great place for enough heat to build up to start a fire. And we have seen that. There was one fire we went to. It was at Christmas time, and it was the extension cord that went to the Christmas lights, and someone had run it underneath an area rug in their living room. And once the fire it was a pretty extensive fire, but what had happened is we had pulled the rug out of the room as part of the cause and origin investigation, and you could actually see it. It was burned into the hardwood flooring. You could map out exactly where the extension cord was because so much heat had built up that was insulated and held in, and it left a perfect black trail. So even after all the hose lines and all the people walking across this floor, we knew exactly where the cord was because it was burned into the floor.
That's interesting.
It was something kind of crazy. You'd never expect to see that, but that's exactly what can happen with an extension cord.
You know, one of the issues, though, you see these, especially in wintertime, these oil coil heaters that look like the old-fashioned hot water radiators and space heaters and stuff, but they don't give you a very long cord on these things. So you have no choice but to put an extension cord because you've got to.
And the reason they don't come with extension cords on them is because those electrical powered oil bath heaters, they use a lot of current. They use a lot of electricity. They're not very efficient. And as a result of that, you have to make sure that you have your circuit and your outlets to start with can withstand that kind of current draw. And that's why they don't put extension cords with them or
Is
long
that
cords.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they do use so much in the way of electricity. So plugging those into an extension cord or plugging them into, say, a power strip or something like that, that's just really a bad idea. We've got stacks of old burned power strips from people putting too many appliances onto one surge protector because they're using it to try to increase the number of outlets in a room.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's expensive, but if you need to use that much electrical power, then you need to call an electrician and have your wiring adjusted and extended. That's the only safe way to do it.
Great point.
Yeah,
Great
those heaters use a lot of power.
Yeah. And can you speak to extension cords themselves? Because there are, I've been into the hardware store myself and I see different weights.
Sure.
And you don't know which one to buy. Some are really heavy duty. There's moderate ones, and then there's the little
light
ones.
duty ones that you would use for something
like a fan or something.
Yeah, or Christmas lights or something like that. It's very important to make sure that you're not using. Look at whatever you're plugging into it. Like even Christmas lights come with information on the back of it as to what you need for an extension cord if you're going to use one, and how big it has to be and what the grade of it is. That's a very common problem where, somebody plugs something in and the outlet can handle it, the wiring in the wall can handle it, but the extension cord can't. And that's what causes a fire. So the other thing that this kind of dovetails with is maintaining the heating system in your house. People have, oil and gas heat, especially people downtown who have access to the city's gas and electric department. Those burners need to be cleaned on a regular basis. Same with oil burners. You need to have a technician come into your house and maintain that equipment for you. If not, that can cause a real problem. If it's not and it's all filled up with carbon and things like that, and that's again how a fire can start.
Yeah, I have to say that my wife is always really good about this. We get our furnace overhauled and taken care of every fall. I'm guessing, wood stoves, pellet stoves.
Yep, it's
those
very
are sources
to keep
of
those chimneys clean
Right.
and make sure they're not plugged. Make sure that you're burning clean, dry wood, and that you're storing wood away from the actual wood stove. Obviously, people bring in enough firewood to get them through the week or through the night or whatever, but you can't stack that up anywhere near a wood stove. We have seen it where the firewood that was stacked on the hearth next to a stove has actually lit on fire, and it didn't cause the whole house to go up, but it certainly filled the house with a ton of smoke and did a lot of damage.
Wow.
Even though just because they were storing things too close to the wood stove.
That's
Make sure you
interesting.
have a free area around the wood stove of 3 feet in every direction, just to make sure there's nothing that's going to ignite accidentally.
Yeah, I would think that especially when it comes to wood stoves, you've got to be really careful about the surface you're placing it on, that's
Yep.
fire resistant, and to your point that there's enough space around it to
And that's
allow
all
ventilation.
dictated by the state building code as far as where you can place a wood stove, what it has to have for enclosures around it, and how it needs to be vented into the chimney. And
Okay.
it's super important to keep those chimneys clean also, because what can happen is creosote can build up inside the chimney, and eventually if it gets hot enough, it can start a fire inside the chimney, which a fire inside the chimney is an issue, because if you have any type of small cracks or anything like that, that can let the smoke and heat get out of the chimney and into the actual framed area surrounding the chimney, even if the chimney's masonry.
Okay, okay. And pellet stoves, which are very popular, are they less prone to issues, or they have the same kind of requirements as far as
No,
heat?
they have the same kind of requirements.
Okay.
They've still got to be treated as just like a wood stove would. I don't have any numbers or anything like that as far as statistics go as to which one is more likely to cause a fire or not. That's not something I've had much exposure to. But either way, you're still talking about a combustion process that is, making toxic gases that has to be vented out properly through a chimney. And these wood stoves and pellet stoves both get hot enough that if anything's in contact with them, they could possibly start a fire.
And the storage of pellets, because people tend to put the bags of pellets on the floor fairly
Yep.
close to those stoves.
And
so that,
just keep them a safe distance away from the stove.
okay,
Yep.
okay. Yeah, all right. You need to be vigilant, everybody. So
That's right.
Keep that in mind. Is there where can people find information concerning electrical outlets and the use of extension cords and that type of thing?
So the best place I can come up with and that I found is actually the Commonwealth of Massachusetts website. That is mass.gov. And if you just type that in, that brings you up to our state's webpage, and it's got a search bar in there where you can search the entire website. Now, it's a large website that has all sorts of information from everything from state services and things like that. But if you type in fire safety, the Department of Fire Services has a lot of information on there for different things about the carbon monoxide detectors and smoke detectors that we discussed before, house numbering, heating safety, elder fire safety, cooking safety, things like that. It's a great resource, and it's got all sorts of topics for educating people to help them out to avoid any problems.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about what happens if there is an emergency in the house. Who do they call? What number do they call? What's their protocol?
So-
and I'm guessing this is immediate. Call as
Yep.
quickly as you can.
Exactly. Call 911. That is the number that gets you to our communication center, which is located right here in town. It's actually up just off the airport, right next to the terminal up there in a separate building. What happens up there is there's multiple dispatchers that are working on duty at the same time. So when you call 911, the first thing they're going to ask you is, what's the exact address of your emergency? And then they're going to ask you what the emergency is. Once you tell the dispatcher is going to keep asking you questions. And we hear this from people a lot. They're trying to gather a lot of information from people to figure out exactly what's going wrong or what we need to send for resources to deal with that. And people get frustrated because they get asked so many questions. What they don't realize is that two things are happening in the background, are happening at once. The person's talking to you and entering that information into a computer. The person sitting next to them is dispatching out the fire department or the police department or the ambulances as you're talking.
Okay.
So even though you don't realize it, there are already people moving in fire stations and police cars and stuff moving to your location. So even though you're being asked a lot of questions, that's not delaying care. That's actually just giving us more information before we get there so we can better handle that emergency.
Okay.
So, like I said, we have heard people frustrated that the dispatchers just keep asking so many questions, and it takes, sometimes that process can take a couple of minutes to get through all those questions. The fire trucks and the police cars are already moving at that point. Somebody else has dispatched them
Yeah.
once they know what the general idea or what the general problem is that's going on in the background. So call 911. Don't hesitate to call 911 and call them fast, especially if you're having a medical emergency. When people are having things like chest pain and shortness of breath and stuff like that, minutes matter. They matter a lot. And we can definitely do more with an earlier notification than we can if somebody waits too long. So we
Great
can't
point.
stress that enough.
And it doesn't matter whether you're calling from a cell phone or a landline?
Nope, you're still going to get, with the way technology is right now, it's still going to be answered by the same people. And your location's still going to pop up on their map screen that they have up in the dispatch center. They will still ask you what the address is because they can gather more information from that than just simply a spot on the map. But they need both. So, yeah, call 911 and don't hesitate to do it.
And will the dispatcher tend to try to keep them on the line, or do
Yep.
they ever say, okay, well, we're hanging up now, but just keep an eye out?
It depends. So the dispatchers have protocols that they go through based on what type of emergency it is and things like that. There are certain emergencies where, let's say, they have to give directions to stabilize the emergency even before any first responders arrive there. They will do things like they will keep people on the line and give directions to people of how to perform CPR. They have different
okay.
directions that they have for how to try to do an emergency, how to stop bleeding or how to assist in childbirth and things like that. So sometimes they will keep you on the lines. Sometimes if it's a lower priority emergency, they may not need to do that. It's all situational dependent, So sometimes they'll be talking to you. They'll still be talking to you on the phone as the firefighters are walking through your door sometimes too.
Okay.
And that has happened a lot of times. So like I said, just because you're talking to the dispatcher, just remember there are people moving in the background that you're not seeing or you're not hearing yet. And they're on their way.
If people aren't sure what's going on, should they still call?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Because if there's something there, if there's enough there to spark somebody's concern, it may be something, it may not be something. There's no way to know.
Better to be careful.
That's right. We'd rather go to a false alarm than show up
Okay.
too late.
Okay, great point. Let's talk about the file of life packets. Those are really important to you more for medical, not so much for fire.
Yep.
And I know that Tina Gorman has just received a new shipment of 1,500 of those packets. And
Yep.
Can you just talk about those and how important they are to you and what
Sure.
people should be
We
thinking
would
about?
definitely encourage everyone who's listening to have one of those file of lives and fill it out completely with all your medications and keep it up to date and put it on your refrigerator. Our crews are going to be looking for those when they come into the house. Somebody is always, it sounds kind of odd, but when you have firefighters there at your house, even if one's not talking to you, somebody's looking at the outside of your fridge just to see if there's that file of life there. We use those in case that someone is unresponsive or for some reason their emergency makes it that they can't answer our questions. By having that there, we can have access to what medications people are taking, what they're allergic to, and what their past medical history is. Our ambulances are actually fairly high tech, and there's a lot of training that goes in with our paramedics as far as what they can administer for medications to people. And some of those medications depend on what people would be taking from their primary care physician. And the paramedic can actually make decisions based on what they're going to do on a patient based on what medications and what history the patient has. So what it does is it improves the care that we can give to you. The more information we have, the better we can handle what's going on and the better the service we can deliver to you.
Right.
So, for people who have multiple elderly people in the house, have more than one file of life up there, one for each person.
Great point.
Yep.
Okay.
And keep them up to date because sometimes people will go to their doctors and their medications will get changed.
Right.
And so that's something that we need to know about. You don't necessarily need to tell us, but you need to have it there in a form that's accessible to us.
Yeah. So to our audience out there, make sure that you get to the senior center. Tina Gorman has those at the center. She's just received a new shipment of 1,500. So if you need a fresh one, get there to pick yours up. And to the deputy chief's advice here, make sure that they are updated as much as you can. Well, Deputy Chief Ben Warren, I want to thank you so much for coming in. We've covered a lot of ground here. Is there anything glaring that we haven't talked about that you can think about?
Geez, not that I can think of offhand. I just want to say thank you to you and to Tina and to Pete for everything you guys do. And I appreciate the opportunity to get out here and talk about this stuff. And this is somewhere where I can really make a difference in the course of the lives of people who are in our community. And we want to support the people who have made the decision to age at home as well as we can, and to provide the best quality of life that we can and give whatever we need for assistance. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come out here and talk to that and get that across to all the people in the community.
Well, you've done a great job. Please extend our thanks, our gratitude, and our appreciation to all of the firefighters and those who drive the ambulances. We are blessed in Westfield to have the crew that we have. We've got a great team.
It starts with our dispatchers, and it extends to the firefighters, the EMTs, the police officers, our partners from other communities that we work with, and even right down to people like you and Tina who help to get this information and our message out there. Yeah. So it's a team effort, and it's great to be a part of such a great team.
Super. Thank you so much for coming in. So our guest today was Ben Warren, Deputy Fire Chief and Fire Prevention Officer with the Westfield Fire Department. I want to thank him for coming in. Special thanks to Pete Coles for getting us on the air and making this show possible, and to Tina Gorman, Executive Director of the Westfield Senior Center and the Westfield Council on Aging, who creates all of these programs and invites all of our guests to come in every month. I am Harry Rock. On behalf of Tina and Pete, I want to say thanks. Have a great day. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next show.